Hey, don't bogart that joint. Pass it over to Josh Gordon. Who? He's the newest New England Patriots wide receiver, and the Patriots are certainly taking a chance on an all-pro player who hopefully won't drop the ball and blow this opportunity. Anyway, in studio, a special edition of Behind the Media is next, and former Patriots GM, longtime Boston media personality Upton Bell joins us in studio next on Behind the Media.
You're tuned in to Behind the Media. Dan Lothian and Jimmy Young bring 70 years of award-winning broadcast experience to the table. From newsrooms across the country, behind anchor desks and in the field, they've seen and covered it all. And now they are here to take you behind the media.
You're going to have to embrace technology. If you're an educator...
I'm embracing it.
I want you to use the phone to help teach these kids.
You don't need to do that. I was covering the president in China, and we did a behind-the-scenes video. This is a gong, or...
No, not a gong. A bong.
A bong.
With a B.
So that's right. I said
the
gong.
Gong is a
That's
gong
right.
show.
I said gong.
Gong
Bong.
makes noise.
Bong.
Okay.
Why is it, Jimmy? Why?
Because sex sells, Dan!
True, but it's only part of the answer. It is, you have to be more creative now to be able to tell a story, and sometimes it's just a before and after picture and saying, which one do you want to be?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to a special edition of Behind the Media. I'm Jimmy Young, filling in for Dan Lothian, who is on assignment at WGBH for the next few weeks. This podcast is available on iTunes, Stitcher, and the CLNSmedia.com network. Engage, like, subscribe, and love us on social media. Just go to CLNSmedia.com and search Behind the Media. It's sponsored by Mack Weldon, a premium line of essential, comfortable, casual wear, from underwear to overwear. But go to MackWeldon.com and use the code CLNSmedia to get an extra 20% off your first order. We're also brought to you by Little Park Media, where ideas come to life, producing corporate videos and podcasts to tell your story. Go online to littleparkmedia.com or contact us at info@littleparkmedia.com. Joining me in studio for this special edition of Behind the Media is a legend in the sports and media industries in the Boston area. His name is Upton Bell. My name is Jimmy Young. And Upton, you are not only still alive and kicking and talking, but your hair has not moved.
It hasn't moved, and it's colored beautifully. And that's the most important thing when you arrive at my point in life.
Well, arriving at any point in life at this point is an awesome thing, and I really appreciate you coming in and joining us on Behind the Media.
Well, you know what? It's great being here, and as you said, it's great being alive. And at my age, every day is a great day. So... here we are.
And you know what's funny? Even at my age, every day is a great day, Upton. That's how I look at it. As long as you live to tell the story is my philosophy of life.
Well, and it's right. I know the subject we're going to attack today. Most football players,
yes,
in my book, President the Creation, My Life in the NFL and the Rise of America's Game, blah, 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 blah,
yes,
is that the average life of a pro football player has not changed. My first training camp with the Chicago Bears, 1946. The average life of a player was 3.5 years. It's the same today. So I warn them the same as me.
Absolutely. And we will get into the NFL. We will get into the news, if you will, of the Patriots picking up Josh Gordon, which even though this is a live video recording, we will be making recorded podcasts out of this. Upton, can you believe the technology, by the way? I mean, you remember the days of film, slicing and dicing, and matter of fact, I know your dad remembers the early days of television too, don't you? Because I read your book, and I really enjoyed it.
Well, I think the big thing, and Burt Bell more than anybody, I know Pete Rozelle, who came along after he died, got the credit for it, but Burt Bell was the first one to see that television was the game of the future. In fact, the first televised game in NFL history was of his Philadelphia Eagles in the 30s. The first national TV game was in a snowstorm in 1948. I was there for that. Eagles and Cardinals, nationally televised. He said, it is the perfect game for television. You get your commercials in. There's a little lull in the action, but there is there is action on every play. He saw the future, and of course, look at it today.
And in fact, in the book, and that was one of the things I really enjoyed. First of all, I was a history major at Tufts University, so any historical perspective is something I really devour. And I also apologize. It took me a few months to read the book because I read so slowly because I pretend I am reading it aloud. It's just how my brain works. And I'm just happy to have a brain that works at this point, right? Anyway.
Well, just ask the president.
That's... We don't mention his name. We call him POTUS. Okay. Anyway, I do want to talk a little bit about the book and your dad, Bert Bell, because he was a visionary. He started the draft. He knew about how important television was going to be. He spouted the importance of parody. He started the draft. I mean, Upton, your dad created the beginning of what is the most successful sports league in America.
Well, the interesting thing is, too, if people are willing to go back in history, is that basically he's the only commissioner that played football, coached football with John Heisman of the Heisman Trophy, owned 2 football teams, and then became commissioner. If ever a person, and people talk about the great presidents that prepared themselves, Franklin Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, Bert Bell was the most prepared person that took over in a very, very bad time for the NFL in the history of sports. The reason is that he understood the game from a player's, coach's, owner's standpoint. And he also understood, because his teams never made any money, in fact, they lost gobs of money, that he understood, he used to say, you're only as strong as your weakest team. His picture of the game, his look at the future, in fact, Jimmy, if you go in today to the NFL Constitution and bylaws, it's not on my bucket list to go check out. But go ahead. If I were to do it, yes, what would I find? You'd end up on the bucket list. Everywhere Bert Bell is writ large, his name isn't there. But what he did is, when he took over in 1946, his brother, who was the governor and also Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania, then became the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, one of the great, really legal minds, wrote much of the NFL Constitution and bylaws, including the one thing that all commissioners in the NFL relied on. He had written in and protected, the commissioner shall rule in the best interests of pro football. That's still there in spite of the Players Association and all the things that are going on. If you go in there, the waiver wire was created by Bert Bell because of the gambling scandal. He wanted to protect the players and the public.
And the integrity of competition, obviously.
Absolutely.
Yep.
That's in there. The chance for the weakest teams to get the players the first choice on the waiver wire. Also, Bert Bell stopped the league from closing in 1941-42, when we first went to war. There was a motion. Now, remember, there were only 7 or 8 owners at the time. Mm-hmm. Let's close it down, and we'll be able to come back. And he said, listen, there is a new league on the horizon, which turned out to be the old All-America Conference. Otto Graham, the great Cleveland Browns, the 49ers. He said, if we close, we will never open up again. If they had closed, we wouldn't be talking about this today. Everywhere he went along. A lot of people don't know this, and Peter King of Sports Illustrated wrote about it 2 years ago. Bert Bell said, let's get rid of the extra point. The only thing, 1942.
I like kickers, by the way. I'm a soccer guy. You know that, so I don't want to get rid of the extra point, but keep going.
Well, he said the field goal will become more important.
Aha.
The touchdown will be 7 points. And look at it now. They're going to move it all the way down to your own 20-yard line.
Right.
The opposing 20-yard line, just to make it look like it's good. Get the hell rid of it. You go for 2 points. You get the touchdown. You have the field goal. The kicker becomes more important. He was for that rule. But the most important thing that he did, which changed pro football forever, was he said, what happens? Now, this is why all of these things today, they have these complex reasons for everything. But here's the simple reason of what I thought, even though he is my father, a very brilliant man. He said, what happens? And in those days, the winner of the championship in the NFL played in the Chicago All-Star Game, which was actually bigger than anything. Arch Ward of the Chicago Tribune had created the baseball All-Star Game. He created the All-Star game between the NFL and the All-Stars, who in those days were usually better than the NFL teams. So my father said, what happens if a game ends up in a tie? What are we going to do? Flip a coin and say, this team goes on the flip of a coin? We'll look like frauds. So he pushed a rule through and said, when a championship game ends up in a tie, we will have a 15-minute overtime or play with sudden death. And I don't like that rule change.
Sudden victory.
Well, they say it's sudden,
I know.
but it was sudden death. So what happened? 10 years after he put it in, when everybody laughed at him.
I know where you're going. The greatest game ever played.
And there was Upton Bell sitting next to Joe DiMaggio at Yankee Stadium at the age of 19.
Wow.
And the only reason I went to the game, because I used to go to all the championship games with my father, he called me and he said, are you coming to this damn game or not? I've got to make arrangements. He was in New York. I was in Philadelphia. I said, is Joe DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe going to be there? He said, well, I don't know about her, but he's going to be there. That's the only reason I went and saw the greatest game of its time and the game that saved the NFL and made it the game it is today.
Indeed. And Upton, you have so many stories, and this is why the book was so intriguing to me. You know, the title of it, I think, says it all. You know, you were present at the creation not only of the NFL, but you were also around for the World Football League, the U.S. Football League. You actually were involved in naming the Patriots. Instead of Boston, Bay State, you got them to be New England Patriots. And how about that? Was 1971 too?
71, but Jimmy, you're in the entertainment business. The first week
Am I?
Yeah, absolutely. This is
entertainment.
The future.
Okay, no, you are.
This is showbiz.
Podcast, yes. Indeed.
So 1971, I come in as a Patriots general manager from the Colts. We had just won the Super Bowl. And I pick up the Boston Globe. And I know they were kind of the laughingstock then. A lot of people today from 2000 to 2018 think there was no pass. But the pass was pretty gaudy. So I pick up the Boston Globe, and it has headline, BS Patriots to move to Foxborough. Now, people were making fun of them and Billy Sullivan right and left. BS, Billy Sullivan, BS, the other word. And I said, oh, my God, they are going to be making fun of us. So I immediately called, and in those days, there was a board of directors. There wasn't one owner like Bob Kraft. In those days, you had to make 32 calls, but Sullivan was the president, and you had the Mars and the sergeants. So I called, and I said, listen, we're moving to Foxborough. We're going to be in the middle of New England. There's 6 states. Let's see if we can draw some people. Let's call it the New England Patriots. I had to force it through the board of directors, if you can believe it, to get it done. But they finally did it, and that's how it ended up being named the New England Patriots.
I love that, and I think that's something that will always be part of your legacy, Upton. That's a huge thing, especially now when you look at the success of the team and having the Crafts as the owners. And by the way, back in the day in the 70s, and I'm not going to date you, but I can.
Well, you can date me all you want.
I grew up in Newton, Massachusetts. We used to go to all the Boston Patriots games at Harvard Stadium, at BU, at Fenway Park. I remember them serenading Mike Holovac on the sidelines one day at a game. And, when you're a young kid, you just think this is the coolest thing ever. When you came in as general manager, there was an immediate uptick in the improvement, the play of the Patriots, because you had a scouting background. You were involved with player personnel as the youngest general manager. I remember the impact you had on that team. So I want to give you credit for that. I also want to tell you that back in that day in the 70s, I used to board a bus at the parking lot in Newton Center. And
Did you ever get home?
Never got home. I was at sports, man. It was always about sports. And at a bus, right, it took us forever to get there. But it was a big bus. There were some very important people on that bus, including the Crafts, who used to take the bus down to Foxborough. They parked the car in Newton Center, get on the bus with the Star family and myself. That's Star double R. I don't want to confuse some of my friends and family out there. But bottom line is, they were fans first. I hung out with that family a little bit as a kid, not knowing, 15 years later, 20 years later, I'd be there when he announced his ownership of the franchise at that press conference in Newton as a professional sportscaster in Boston, which was my career goal.
Yeah.
So, the Crafts have always been around football. They've been big sports fans. They've done a great job. And I'm just going to make a special little plug here for Sensi Magazine, which is a new magazine. I wrote an open letter to Robert Kraft in this month's edition of Sensi Magazine, urging him to take the lead amongst his owners in getting rid of opioids and not testing and embracing cannabis and CBD as alternatives to putting these guys on Vicodin and Percocet. And he has not responded yet, but I want to go on record as saying I actually did that because I believe in it.
Well, I think he will, and it's pretty interesting that my first training camp, I mean, when my father owned the Eagles, I was 4 or 5 years old, but we lived in the same house with 33 football players. We lived in a hotel first. I was born, lived in a hotel, the Ritz-Carlton, which his grandfather...
It wasn't the Super 8 back then, I just want to say.
No, it wasn't. In fact,
was the Ritz.
It's still there on Broad Street, and his father was the richest landowner in Philadelphia. So where does Bert Bell take his 33 players when his father has cut him off after lending him $200,000? We live at the Ritz.
Yada. Only the best.
And then we live in all these different houses on the main line. But, my babysitters made an extra $5 a week to babysit me. And I still have one of the checks on it. But back to the Patriots situation and what essentially happened here. And I give Kraft a lot of credit. Mm-hmm. But 1946, my first official at the age of 9, Bears training camp. And if people today think the game is brutal, the players are bigger, quicker, faster than they've ever been.
Right.
But the game then, Tom Brady could have slept on all his pillows and taken all that crap he's taking from his rent-a-trainer, but he wouldn't have lasted.
His name's Alex Guerrero. Yeah, go ahead. Keep going. Yeah.
The game was so brutal.
Yep.
My first training camp at the Bears Rensselaer training camp, guys were getting laid out, and the injuries factor was really terrible.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I do buy the idea because I've seen a lot of things happen. The syringes taken at halftime,
yep.
The painkillers that have made some of these people cripple later on in life.
Taking years off their lives.
I have no problem with marijuana being taken judiciously to deal with the pain, and some of the new things they're coming out with. I'm very much with that.
That's awesome, and I appreciate that. And we call it cannabis now, by the way. We don't try to mention that M word, but that we don't need to go there. I do want to go back to football because that's why you're here.
Yeah.
And you also had a great career in media, too, and we'll get to that in a minute. I do want to go back to the book and some of the things that are in the book that I found fascinating. Your relationship with Don Shula was completely new to me. I had no idea because I'm a Boston fan. I could care less what happens outside of Boston. I only support my teams here. But the relationship that you developed with Don Shula when he was with the Colts was a fascinating thing. And I do want you to compare, because you did in the book, how Shula runs a team and an organization compared to Mr. Belichick down the road in Foxborough. You make some great analogies between the two. There were similarities. Can you expand a little bit on that and talk a little bit about Don Shula versus Bill Belichick? Because, ultimately, one of them is going to be considered the greatest coach of all time, not Vince Lombardi, because Vince didn't win as many games as Don Shula and Bill Belichick.
Well, not only that, to some of the points that I've made in the book, first and foremost, I look at 4 or 5 as right there. Greatest coach, innovator, Bill Belichick, paid tribute to him when he went to Cleveland. Paul Brown, when I first went to, and I'll get to Belichick because I need to set this up. 1950, my father had effected as commissioner a merger between the old All-America Conference and the NFL. Mm-hmm. And so I went with him to the first training camp in Cleveland, Hiram, Ohio. Now, you got to remember what the game was like before that. Brown instituted the 40-yard dash, the IQ test, the film study, the playbook, coming to a hotel the night before the game. The one thing I don't like that I see today, but it was successful with Otto Graham, was calling every play. The sideline, the messenger guard. And guess who was one of the top messenger guards? Chuck Noll.
Chuck Noll. Remember, he did pretty well, too, huh?
Yeah, well, he was at Baltimore, and I would say Paul Brown, Don Shula, Bill Belichick, Chuck Noll, There are
And
Bill
Vince.
Walsh. I mean, there are other ones there that are really good. But here's the thing that people will not buy here. First and foremost, when you're only 24 years old and the person you're working for drops dead, and you come back and you try to persuade Shula and the owner, Carol Rosenblum, put it in the hands of a 25-year-old kid.
And we're talking about your dad who passed away during a football game in Philadelphia. You were there, and you are that 24-year-old kid. Keep going.
Well, no, but then later on, I was the assistant personnel director. The personnel director was like 40 years older than me. I was in Dallas scouting a player for spring practice, and I get a call, your boss has dropped dead. Get in a car and get the hell back here or a plane. I went back, and first thing I did is I walked into Shula. And people think Lombardi was tough or that Bill Belichick is tough. Shula was really tough.
Oh yeah.
He was the most direct guy that I ever worked with. Never lied to you. You get in a fight with him and it was forgotten the next day. And I said, listen, the only way to deal with you is to tell you, I want that job. I know you're going to hire or look at hiring a lot of other people. Give me a year. And if you don't like it, bring somebody else in. He made a decision that I wouldn't have made if I was a coach. I would have never given a 25-year-old kid the job. But he did. And that told me something about him. That basically he was willing to take a chance. You know, he was going to protect himself.
Right.
And if he didn't, I'd be in here and I'd be your assistant.
I don't have an assistant.
Well,
helper. You'd be a production assistant. I get you.
Whatever it was.
Yeah.
But the thing about him is he had one of the great minds I've ever been around. He also was something else that not every coach is. Belichick to a degree. But Shula understood players, and he really respected the draft. And so, therefore, if I would go to him about a player, he would listen, and then he would study it. He wasn't somebody who said, just get me the players, and if you screw up, that's it, you're out the door. And so he had the ability to judge players. His offensive mind, he was a defensive genius at that time with the Detroit Lions.
And that was the reputation, as you know, of Belichick, too.
Yeah.
But they were both teachers. Were they not teachers of technique? Isn't that a similarity between the two?
It is, but here's the thing people forget. The exceptional ones, the exceptional defensive minds, usually know the offense better because what the hell have they been studying but offense all along? And I'll never forget the day that Norm Van Brocklin, who was the head coach of the Minnesota Vikings, one of the great minds as a quarterback, led the Eagles, that were not a very good team, to the 60 championship against the Packers before their reign started. He came to Baltimore, and they get up on the blackboard, and for 2 days, match wits. It was like Bobby Fischer versus
Spassky, Boris Spassky.
Boris Spassky.
We are dating ourselves again.
Why not? You know what?
That's right.
People don't read or write enough today.
No, they don't.
So we're giving them a lesson.
Yes.
So Shula and Van Brocklin, it was like watching a great tennis match. Going back and forth and back and forth. And afterwards I said, Van Brocklin really was the definitive offensive mind. But after that was over, I said, you know what? Shula knows more than him. So there was that degree. And remember this about Shula. People talk about the great Packer teams of the 60s. We would have won the 5 that they won, except for a missed kick in Green Bay and 2 other ones, when then you didn't have the luck of Patriots, great as they are, in a lousy division, win a couple of games and you're in the Super Bowl. Then if you didn't qualify and win your division, there was no playoff.
You are listening to Behind the Media with Jimmy Young, and I am joined by the great Upton Bell, former general manager of the New England Patriots, as well as a player personnel guy. But more, I'll tell you what, Upton, let's cut to the chase. You're also a media personality. You've been on radio in Boston had been on Boston radio for about 30 years, and you are always a go-to guy to bring in studio for insight that let's just say some of the talent you worked with didn't get. You've broken down film. You understand what it's like to be in the trenches and what it's like to be in the locker room and work with some of the greatest minds in the NFL history. If Don Shula was coaching in the Super Bowl last year, would he have played Malcolm Butler?
Yes.
No doubt about it.
Yes, and that's a mystery that will never be explained. But I also understand the philosophy of coaches like a Belichick, and this is not a knock at him, by the way.
I can knock him, though, because I do blame him for not winning the Super Bowl last year. It's the first time I can point the finger and say, you went against everything that you stood for. It isn't all about the team. You are so arrogant that you can't get out of your own way, and that's his weakness. Go ahead. I had to do it.
Well, but let me explain something else.
Go ahead.
If you're not arrogant, you're not going to be a great actor, a great broadcaster, or a great coach.
I like that.
And if somebody isn't arrogant enough, I wouldn't hire them.
There's confidence and there's arrogance, though. You can be confident, Upton, but the arrogance takes you over the line, that you make yourself bigger than the decision, which is really the first time I saw Mr. Belichick do that.
Well, that's right, but let me give you another thing. And by the way, I'm one of the people that agree with you on this. Is we don't know, and we will never know what went on really behind that week. And I'm convinced there are more things that we will never find out about that went on that week. And I will tell you this because I've said it on a lot of meetings with coaches, and including meetings in our business, where I'm saying to somebody, hey, that guy is really great. He belongs on the air. And the general manager, program director say, yeah, but he's a pain in the ass. And I say, so what?
You talking about me? Because I definitely know I've been part of those meetings and people have described me that way.
But you're still working.
Yeah, sort of, kind of. Right? Yeah, right. Okay, fine.
And most of them are fired.
Yeah,
right?
I never. Well, that's not true. Go ahead, keep going.
So what I'm saying is that there had to be a reason. But here's where it got me. When you saw that your cornerback was getting picked on early, and then you saw your safeties were, and you saw essentially a second-string quarterback cutting you apart, although I never believed in that defense.
Yep. And the communication breakdown in the defensive secondary all game long. Go ahead.
If he had at least put him in the last quarter.
Correct.
Then I think you could have accepted all the other things. But again, here's the great thing and here's the bad thing about Belichick. You'll never know not only about that, but even in this new book that has been written, that is an expose of the NFL.
A kid from Newton.
Yeah.
A nice Jewish boy from Newton, I think, wrote that book. Mark Leibovitz?
Mark Leibovitz.
Yeah.
Leibovitz. Is that basically he talked to Brady. Brady was willing to talk. Kraft talked too much.
He always does. It's nothing wrong with that. He owns the team. He can get away with it.
And a lot of other owners, including Jerry Jones, have said he'd much rather get in the Hall of Fame than win a championship. I said, that tells me enough about him.
Right.
But the only guy that wouldn't tell him anything was Belichick. Like him or not, he is always true to himself. A lot of other people are pretty damn phony about talking to people and doing things. So, but bottom line is that was a mistake. People do make mistakes. But in looking at it, and here's one thing I do want to bring up with your audience that bothers me because there are too many people out there that are now just getting into this business on the sports side. And here it goes. Boy, the GOAT did it again.
Oh, I hate
Greatest player of all time. And that includes the media, the Chad Finns in the world and stuff like that. And they'll say,
I like Chad Finn.
Yeah, I do too.
Okay.
But that doesn't make him right. Because here's the thing.
Okay.
I look at it and I go all the way back, as I do in the book.
Yes, you do.
All the way back.
At the creation. You were present at the creation.
Right there. Right in the stable with the rest of the wise men. I go back and I look all the way, and the two people that I do pick in the book as the two greatest are Brady and Unitas.
Yep.
But what I say is, and this includes Marino, Elway, and a lot of people.
Even Aaron Rodgers. Aaron
Rodgers, fabulous.
Yep.
if they had the rules that you had today,
Yeah.
Unitas was still the greatest quarterback I've ever seen. He played in a time where there were better teams each week. He took a beating on every play. He ended up totally crippled.
Yeah.
But as far as he had the same thing that Brady has, they understand defenses. They know how to make the move. But here's the big difference. Unitas called every one of his plays.
I know.
Brady calls none of them. Now, the thing is...
Brady can change the play at the line of scrimmage, however.
That's correct. But still,
Okay.
Remember the key play in the Atlanta game near the end when they're making the comeback and Josh McDaniels is in his ear and telling him the cornerback is going to be playing you to the inside, make the throw to the outside. You know what? When you're on your own,
you still throw the ball. You're the quarterback.
Yeah.
You still make that decision.
Yeah, you may. But that's my point. The player's bigger, quicker, stronger, faster. But I will argue the fact that if you have not seen it going all the way back, just like I can't tell you whether Babe Ruth or Jim Thorpe were the greatest of all time because I didn't see them. But going back to one I did see, I would say that I can say unequivocally John Unitas
Was the best.
was the best.
Do you think that football should... They'll never change this, I know. But wouldn't it be great to see for the last quarter of each game that you turn off the quarterbacks have to make their own calls? I just think that would be amazing, and I think that would be fun to watch. And it would also give the Patriots even more of an advantage.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Because I don't need Josh McDaniels making $5 million a year to tell Brady what to do, because Brady would be perfect in the Unitas era because Brady doesn't need somebody calling plays for him. He really knows what he's doing. But look what it's bastardized itself into now. Now you got the defense, the linebacker. He's got a thing in his helmet and calling the plays. They're
robots. They're becoming robots.
You're taking the game away from the players, and you're not. Part of football is quick reaction. It's like the hitter and the batter.
But they're planning what 11 guys do on the field or 22 guys on every play. Everybody has a job and a responsibility on every play.
But, Jimmy, they always did. They always did. But they were thinkers.
Right.
They prepared them. They prepare them even more now.
Right.
Why not? That's what's made the game to me. Now, I'm talking about me.
I know. You've seen it for 80 years. I've seen it for 60 years.
It looks, if you turn on the red zone and you look at, I've got 2 sets, and you look at all these games and I say, they all look the same.
Interesting.
They all look the same. And if there's a greater danger than the concussion situation and the drug situation and the police blotter situation in the offseason, and the parents not wanting their kids to play. The greatest danger has always been, I remember what a TV executive told me back in the 60s. He said, when we get tired of you, we'll go to bullfighting. And what you have to be careful.
It's just content, and it's just eyeballs.
That's it. They don't get enough eyeballs.
That's right.
They
That's
don't
media.
care about the concussion.
That's Media 101. I actually said that to my class yesterday at Dean College. I do teach down there, and I talk about media, and it's just a conduit for content. And the whole key to it is the content better be interesting enough for people to watch it and be entertained, or it doesn't work and you get something else. Bullfighting or whatever you want to throw out there. I like the bulls. Let's not go there.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to talk to you about your media career and working with Bob Lobel. Bob Lobel and I go back to the exact day that he started at WBZ. I held the door for Bob on his first day because I was producing sports with Jimmy Myers, for Jimmy Myers at Channel 4 at the time in 76, 77. And I've always loved Bob. When I became a professional sportscaster in Portland, Maine in the early 80s, I was Bob Lobel on TV because you always imitate and emulate the people that you respect, whether that's a play-by-play announcer, whether that's a salesperson, whatever it is. So I was Bob Lobel for a handful of years until I got to the point where I was comfortable being myself, 2 divorces later, and became who I am, what I ever was, and I got my own show in New England Cable News and all that neat stuff, and that was my career. My goal was to come back. first of all, how is Bob doing? And second of all, working with him, do you remember one or two special moments with him that really stand out?
Well, first and foremost, I haven't seen him in a while. I know he's had his problems.
He's struggling.
He's really struggling, and it's a shame he had those back operations.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to tell him, forget it. Anytime anybody touches your back. I mean, I had a terrible accident and fractured 49 parts of my spine and broke my neck in 2 places.
Whoa!
And
when was this? When was that?
This is ironic because it's your ex-station.
Ex-station.
3 years ago now, just before the Super Bowl and the Brady Deflategate routine.
Yeah.
Your friend of mine, Jim Browdy, said, would you please come up, bring your Super Bowl ring with you. It's a week before the Super Bowl against Seattle.
Yeah.
He said, and I want to try and straighten out this whole thing. Did he deflate the balls or not? So I went and did the interview, and by the way, I said he did. Yep. Absolutely. No question in my mind. I said, it's only a $25,000 fine. What the hell are we worried about? Except Brady's all about image.
Right.
On my way home, 6:30 at night, going down Route 2, my car either hit a patch of ice or something happened, went up an embankment, flew up in the air, turned over twice. Channel 5 has the tape of it. Came down on the front of another car, and that when they pulled me out, they thought I was dead. I broke my neck in 2 places, just hanging off, and fractured my spine, severe concussion, every part of my body from the waist up. They thought I was going to be paralyzed. And the thing is, and I told Lobel, I said, they had 2 choices when they rushed me to the MGH. He said, we can operate, we can't guarantee you'll live through it. We can try this at putting you in this big contraption.
In the collar.
Well, no, it's a collar, but it was a full body thing.
Right.
Because of all the fractures.
Yep.
And I said, forget the operation. I said, I don't want anybody touching my spine. So 6 months later, I've spent 6 months in a hospital.
Wow.
And was able to recover because I was in good shape. I just said to Lobel, don't let anybody touch your back, your spine. And of course he did, so he's having a hard time, but he's doing the cannabis.
He's doing a podcast on CLNS Media, which happens to be the same media outlet that we work with, and we adore.
Good for him.
And I give him a lot of credit for making it happen. In fact, I met Jim McMahon, the former Bears quarterback, this past weekend at the Freedom Rally.
Is he all there? I mean, I know he's had
he is absolutely
time.
not. Absolutely not. It's apparent and it's sad, but I still, said to him, I just want you to know that I was one of those 1,000 media guys to stick a microphone in front of you during your career, and you were always great copy, and I appreciated it. You know what I mean? And even though he beat and broke my heart when the Bears crushed the Patriots, it's still, I have learned later in life to respect championships, no matter who gets them.
Well, that might have been one of the greatest teams of all time.
Yeah, that's right. I think it was the greatest team of all time.
I would pick the greatest team I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Any one of the 4 Super Bowls of the Pittsburgh Steelers.
How many Hall of Fame? They had like 20 Hall of Famers out of 22 guys.
They and of course Chuck Noll too. But getting back to Lobel, the interesting thing was I never, other than being interviewed all the time on the other side as a general manager and personnel director, I had no basic experience in it. But that's what really helped me because I really didn't give a damn. Lobel and I were the perfect odd couple. He was a wonderful, outgoing, fun guy and a great guy to work with. And I was the person that said, you know what, you might be getting in trouble with me, but this is who I am. I'm going to be who I am, and I'm not going to take any lessons. By the way, they sent me to see Paul Newman's speech coach, and I knew I was in trouble the minute he said, get on the ground and grovel like an animal. I said, what the hell's that supposed to mean?
That's an interesting technique.
He said, we're teaching you this method that they had all of that stuff. And I said, no, that's not for me. I went back to general manager. I said, let me just be who I am. If I make it, fine. If I don't. But it was the perfect, probably the best relationship I ever had on the air because neither one of us knew what the other one was going to say. But we were the first ones to go to the general manager of WBZ and say, we're going to interview Dave Copay, who's gay,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to do all these controversial interviews. I remember one with the one that was great with Lobel is he adored a Woody from Ohio State.
Yep.
And,
Woody Hayes.
Yeah, Woody Hayes.
Yep.
And he said, he's my idol. I said, I think he's a stiff. I said, he beats up people. He hasn't thrown the ball since Garfield was shot. I said, forget all of this. I said, let's line him up. So we got him on. And
is this
Woody,
before or after he took out the guy on the sideline during
before,
a game? Okay.
Before the Clemson thing.
Yep. Okay.
So Woody comes on, and I figure, you know what, Bob's going to ask him all these questions about football and the 3-yard in a cloud of dust. I said I could care less. So I said just offhand, I said, you know, Woody, I said, what isn't more important, if anything, to you than football? And for the next half an hour, he did a takeoff on some of the greatest writers in history. And it was an amazing session. I still wish that I had that
tape. Oh, my gosh. I have so much stuff on tape I have to digitize.
He was amazing.
Yeah.
His knowledge. He was a great history guy. He talked about Thoreau. He said, Thoreau was a sissy. He said all he wanted to do was go to jail. He said, let me give you some of the other people who were more positive, and here's how I remember the general manager running in after said, you know what, forget all that sports. I want more of that.
Oh.
That's where
that's how you start
went.
to get all those interviews. And I'm looking, by the way, at the lineup of the people you guys have talked to, presidents and superstar athletes and Dr. Joyce Brothers Upton. Come on. Jackie Mason. I mean, these are some blasts from the past.
Well, I will tell you at that time, I said to him, let's get on the most mysterious man in the world. I said, let's see if we can reach Sir Edmund Hillary.
Oh.
And what
the guy that went to Everest the first time, right?
The first
guy on Everest.
First guy to conquer Everest. So we did a lot of things that people didn't do in sports at that time, and I think that's what made the show really unique.
And it was great to listen to, and I loved listening to it as much as I possibly could. I do want to get back to a little bit more about football and Present at the Creation, which is your book. You wrote it with, we haven't mentioned Ron Borges, by the way.
He did a great job.
He did a very good job. He's a great writer.
Yeah.
I mean, he should have done a great job. How did you pick Ron?
For the simple reason, I had 2 deals in New York, 2 fairly famous writers, but then I started to think, to do a book like this, to go all the way back into the 30s and look at it, what it was really like. The only person that goes back at least into the 50s is Borges. And to write a book like this, I wasn't interested in whether you were a beautiful writer or a flowery writer or anything like that. Somebody, when I sit down and talk, what was it like to watch Sammy Baugh, who still has one of the strongest arms I've ever seen, played for the Redskins? Yeah. What was it like in Baltimore in the 60s? When it was a town that was the closest thing to Thornton Wilder's Our Town, in love totally with the Colts. Churches turned off at noon so the game could be played. People going into bars, and the players then didn't have handlers and all the other things, and no Twitter, and no Gronk doing it, taking off a shirt somewhere on Shark Night. It was. I said, somebody has to be able to capture that. What was that feeling to be like when you had Big Daddy Lipscomb and Gino Marchetti and all of these great characters who then didn't retreat home or go into their studio or talk to Jim Gray like Brady does. They went into the bars afterwards. They also, to capture the blue-collar nature of Baltimore, to capture, John Unitas, Gino Marchetti, Alan Amici, people are still known to a degree today. They had day jobs.
Yes, they did. That's the way it was back then. Yeah. You had to make a living, and football was a hobby.
I'll tell you, what's interesting, unlike today with all the guys that make so much money, most of them didn't end up on the heap of life. Most of them had businesses that they could go into afterwards. And Rosenblum, the owner, who was a great friend of JFK's, that's a whole other show sometime, is basically put them in business. Alan Amici and Gino Marchetti are multimillionaires. Amici died, but Gino's still alive at 90, and it's amazing all of those guys in the end made money. So it was you did your job. The hours were just as long, almost as what Belichick puts these people through.
Mm-hmm.
But if you got through, you had a night job. They had a different perspective on life. They understood the realities. They were more easy to deal with. I will say this. Of all the experiences I had, those 10 years there in that town with those people could never be recreated again. HBO ought to do a special on it, a 5-part series.
Or a 30 by 30 on ESPN. They do that. That's a great idea. You mentioned a little bit something about the players and having to work. The NFL Players Association and the collective bargaining agreement for football players is absolutely the worst of all the sports. Non-guaranteed contracts, no guarantee about health benefits. You talked about the length of the career of a football player, under 3 years. Not for long is what NFL stands for in the jargon, if you will. With the collective bargaining agreement expiring in the next 2 years, I think 2020 is the year.
Yep, correct.
Do you expect a work stoppage of some kind? Will the owners lock out the players, or will the players who have been stockpiling funds stop the game and hold out in order to get a much better health benefit and guaranteed contracts? To me, it's criminal what the NFL owners have done to the players.
The answers are no and no. And there are reasons. Interesting. The reason that there was never guaranteed contracts in the NFL actually was brought in by Bert Bell, but it was brought in by my father because at the time nobody was making money. He said, I remember him sitting in his office on City Line in Philadelphia and calling different teams and saying, your payroll is too goddamn high. He said, you're going to be out of business. He said, you can't guarantee these contracts. And they also had the option clause, which was fought for years and years and years.
Yep.
But the players have never learned the lesson because they talk about holding out. And remember the last time they held out, they brought Doug Flutie in here
and other people and other players.
And it never worked.
No,
and it won't for the simple reason.
But the public now knows the dangers of football. They know what these guys are sacrificing. And I doubt there'll be a lot of people out there in the public who'll be siding with the owners who will continue to print money because of their television deals.
Guess what about the owners? They don't care.
They just care about making the money.
They'll let the public scream.
Bob Kraft is not like that. Bob Kraft is a mensch. He does care about his players. He treats them like family, but he is also a tough businessman. But a tough businessman can be fair, and that's all I'm asking for the owners to do, is to be fair and create a deal that makes sense.
Jimmy.
It'll never happen, right?
Yeah. That's like the miracle of the loaves and fishes. It isn't going to happen for the simple reason they have never forced them to give really guaranteed contracts. They have never forced them. They're getting a less percentage of the take than they were the last time around.
They bought into free agency because they figured that was the only way that they could increase their salaries. And what has happened, as you know, I am sure, the best players are getting the salaries, but it's the middle class that's kind of disappeared in the NFL.
Well, the whole thing now, and by the way, I don't totally agree with you on Bob Kraft. Now, maybe that's because he leaves it to Belichick. But there have been more players that they have cut or gotten rid of here that still had time left because they looked at the bottom line as a very, very cold, cutthroat game. For all the glory you see on Sunday.
They put a financial value on each player's ability.
And Kraft can say, I love you and everything else like that. And Belichick is saying his fanny is out of here. And that brings up...
How'd that work out with Jimmy Garoppolo, Tom Brady, and that whole thing last year?
I was about to bring that up, and I, from the very beginning, said the biggest mistake in this franchise history was letting Garoppolo go, even if it cost him $25 or $30 million. But the thing was, Belichick was right. Belichick saw the future and said, how much longer is Tom going to play, even if it's 4 years or whatever he wants to say with Tom versus time,
right?
Which is really tiresome by now, is that basically Belichick, the coach, was right. But Brady went to the owner, and the owner should have stayed out of it and said, basically, I'll tell you what, which every other owner did, with Eddie DeBartolo, with Montana and San Francisco. When you see it's near the end, even if Brady is still getting the rub downs from Guerrero, it does look great.
Mm-hmm.
You have to prepare for the future.
Yes, you do.
All those people that are down there loving them right now, about 5 years from now, half will be there, and they won't be loving it. If Kraft had said, you know what, Tom, let's make a deal. You win one more Super Bowl, and let's move on. And Brady, by the way, did tell Leibovich in the book that we were talking about.
Yep.
He said, here are 8 teams I'd love to go to. And he said, what if they want to put me on and get rid of me? Okay, now. He understands the reality. They didn't, and the owner should have stayed out of it. And if it didn't work out with Garoppolo, it would have been Belichick's fault.
Yes, it would, you know what? I can totally understand where Robert Kraft is coming from with Tom Brady. I can totally understand the trade of Garoppolo. No, they did not get what they expected to get, should have gotten. The value was certainly not equal to what they received. That being said, this is what has to happen in football these days. To put a franchise tag on Jimmy Garoppolo and pay him $25 million for the year, which would be more than what Brady was making for a year. He couldn't live with that. He couldn't. You remember Brady versus Bledsoe in that debate back in 2000 and 2001. I mean, it went on and on and on and on. Kraft did not want to have to go through that again. He said, look, Tommy's my boy. He's going to stay.
Wrong.
I love that.
See, wrong, because Jimmy, because I almost a couple of times, I was an owner of a team in Charlotte, North Carolina, but with Arnold Palmer and a group. But
that's why we have this helmet here, and we'll explain before we shut off here.
But I almost was able to repurchase the Eagles, my father's team, and another team. And if I was sitting in Robert Kraft's chair, I would have definitely asked Tom to move on. Because
in the middle of a season?
No, not
okay.
No.
I just want to make sure you would have done it in the off season or something like that.
I would. It's not like the Patriots are poor. I would have paid the price for one more season, and said, you know what? And I'm sure people would come down on me and all of those suck ups in the media that want him still around and everything else. And I understand that, but it is a cruel game. It is. Our business is a cruel game.
Broadcasting, yes.
Did anybody ever guarantee you a job? They don't.
No, there's always that out. There's always that just cause out.
If you get into it, and I'll give Brady credit, he understands it. When you get into a business, we are in the two most dangerous businesses other than going to war. You can be cut at any time. The Ted Koppels are gone. They're all gone.
Mm-hmm.
Is
Matt Lauer.
You understand when you get in it, that this is the possibility you could wake up someday and the program director calls you and say, you've really been great. Get your keys in now. That's what football is. That's what the game is.
And you were there at the beginning, so you understand that. And I appreciate that. I got to ask you the question right up. If you were general manager of the Patriots, do you take a chance on Josh Gordon?
All depends on how desperate I am.
Well, you've already made 28 different receivers in camp for the last 6 months. I mean, they have a problem at wide receiver.
Would I take him? No, because history usually repeats itself. Maybe for a while here, they've tried some bad personalities.
Yes, they have.
But here's my take with all the crap that's going on now. These things should have been addressed in the off season. When you lost Danny Amendola, when you know that Edelman is coming back off a knee injury, how many people really truly recover, including the Wes Welkers, coming back from that type of ACL, that injury? At 33, he might be good for a while, but you never addressed the problems in this team. You drafted a tackle. All right, and we see what's happened to him.
He's gone.
He's gone. And they drafted a running back, Sony Michel, who looks okay. But where are their needs? Linebacker, receiver, then offensive line. Were they ever really addressed? No.
Well, as you know, Upton, they build their roster with unrestricted free agents for a couple of reasons. They want teachable guys that are dedicated to the game, love the game, willing to work, willing to study. That's the kind of player that Belichick likes to work with. And he doesn't like to pay his draft picks because they're slotted into a salary slot, and he doesn't like to be told to do anything. Don't tell me that's what he's worth. I'm going to tell you what he's worth.
Well,
anyway.
But let me ask you how those are working out for you last Sunday.
Yeah, but one game. I'm not worried about September. September is really the preseason in the National Football League. Anybody who knows, it looks at history, knows that the least important month of the year is September.
Except, and I agree with that, except take a look what you're playing with. If Brady isn't here,
yes, I know,
or even Garoppolo,
Yep.
that could have been a blowout.
That's right. So, President at the Creation by Upton Bell and Ron Borges. It's available on Amazon.
On Amazon, and you can get it. It's still in the bookstores.
What's a bookstore? No, I'm only kidding. I love Barnes & Nobles. It's a great thing.
And some people are looking at it as a movie.
I love that idea. Tell me a little bit about this helmet, because it's been sitting here, and there's a great little story about it. Try to make it within a minute, though, if you can.
And there's a chapter in the book on it. Basically, I was the first one to discover Charlotte, North Carolina, where they now have a pro team, as a franchise potential area. So when the World Football League came about, I took a group together, including Arnold Palmer, and we had a franchise in Charlotte. We actually made money, but in the end, we didn't have a league to go into. You know who also did our TV? It was Ted Turner, who sat on my desk and put his feet in my face and said, you know what, my biggest problem isn't your team. I'll take it everywhere, son. He said, my biggest problem is I'm thinking about this cable news network. He said, and I said, geez, doesn't sound like it'll make it.
Upton
That's
Bell.
all you need to know.
Upton Bell is the man, the myth, the legend. I so appreciate you coming in today. I loved your book. I certainly have been recommending it on the streets of New England, wherever I tend to hang out. And you have been listening to Behind the Media with Jimmy Young. I've been filling in for Dan Lothian, who is on assignment at WGBH for the past week. This podcast is available on iTunes, Stitcher, and the CLNSmedia.com network. Engage, like, subscribe, and please love us on social media. You can also remember that this program is helped by a sponsorship courtesy of Mack Weldon. It's a premium line of essential, comfortable, casual wear, from underwear to overwear. But go to MackWeldon.com and use the code CLNS Media to get an extra 20% off your order. For Upton Bell, my director, Steve Helmuth, our new executive producer, Joyce Gerber, I'm Jimmy Young. We'll see you next time on Behind the Media. And now you know what goes on behind the media.
I love it.
Woof.
I love it.
How long, Steve?